All right, everyone. Thank you all for joining me today. I am your man, Corb J. And I'm thankful that you guys are here today. Okay, I want to get right into this conversation because we've once again experienced another coup, this time in Central Africa, Gabon, where the current president, Ali Bongo Ondimba, was arrested and placed on house arrest by his own generals. And I want to talk to you guys about why we're seeing the series of coups in Africa and why this one particularly will trigger a new shift in dynamic in Africa. More importantly, this coup spells freedom for Africa and why Africa is right now crying and screaming from the mountaintop that they are fed up of Western alliance and presidents who are puppets for the West. He, like the other ones that we've experienced over the last few years, and also most recently, just about 5 weeks ago in Niger, were all Western puppets. And I want to talk to you guys about that. Here's what you're going to get in this video. First, I'm going to tell you about the conversation that is being had right now amongst all the presidents in Africa, as well as Western leaders. I'm going to tell you the players. This important conversation that is being had. I think it's important for you to know what's going on. And I'm going to tell you what that is. I'm also going to tell you why this event, this current coup that occurred in Gabon, along with the one that happened in Niger and as well as the ones that have happened over the last 4 to 5 years, will again create a scramble for Africa, this time between BRICS as well as NATO. It is also going to make the journey for Africa and the future for Africa very, very hard. Africa is going to find itself in a conundrum, which is currently what they have right now. And I want to talk to you about that dynamic. Lastly, I'm going to tell you how this is going to strengthen NATO and why NATO is about to become strengthened as a result of a new deal that may be signed by NATO as well as some African countries. So let's get right into it because I've got quite a lot, as you can see, and I want to jump right into this whole thing. Okay, so let's talk about the recent events that happened in Gabon. So Gabon's president, Ali Bongo, was, as I mentioned earlier on, was arrested. As a matter of fact, it happened to be his own cousin who was the head of the presidential guard, the person who was tasked to protect him and has protected him for years. This is the same person that deposed him and had him arrested. He, along with his whole family, have ruled Gabon. Gabon has had a dynasty rule over the last 56 years. Ali Bongo's father ruled Gabon for 42 years, from 1967 all the way to 2009. He took over from his father in 2009 and ruled for 14 years. The election that occurred in Gabon was what sparked this whole outrage and the coup that occurred. The results were announced on August 30th, and he was declared the winner. And shortly after that, he was arrested. Why? Because the entire election was marred, just like his presidency, was marred by corruption. Ali Bongo, during the entire time he was contesting and also when the elections were taking place, turned off the internet and also barred international observers and journalists from coming to observe the election because, again, he was going to he was corrupting the entire process just to get a re-election. I want you to take a listen to the video that he released shortly after he was placed on house arrest, and also the statements made by the junta right after they arrested him. And I'll be right back.
I'm Ali Bongo Ondimba, President of Gabon, and I'm to send a message to all the friends that we have all over the world to tell them to make noise, for the people here have arrested me and my family. My son is somewhere, my wife is in another place, and I'm at the residence. Right now, I'm in the residence and nothing is happening. I don't know what's going on. So I'm calling you to make noise to make noise, really. I'm thanking you.
Il est porté à la connaissance de la communauté nationale et internationale que M. Ali Bongo Ondimba est gardé en résidence surveillée. Il est entouré de sa famille et de ses médecins. Peuple gabonais, c'est enfin notre essor vers la félicité que Dieu et les mânes de nos ancêtres bénissent le Gabon. Honneur et fidélité à la patrie, je vous remercie.
Okay, so that video has been circulating the entire internet, okay, which is very interesting because this is the same internet that he shut off and prevented his own people from actually getting the word out while he was defrauding the entire election process. Now, this coup has been condemned by everyone. It has been condemned by the African Union, which Gabon is a member of, or I should say was a member of, because they have since been suspended from the African Union. The Economic Community of West African State, ECOWAS, has also condemned this coup, along with international bodies, France and the United States. Now, I want to talk about the international body for a second and their own so-called condemnation, because the hypocrisy that we're seeing from these so-called international body who have been meddling with Africa for a long time is such that needs to be called out. So the international body felt the need to condemn this whole thing. But at the same time, when they all knew, they didn't condemn when he shut off the internet and rigged the election that was going on in this country, the recent one that happened, and as well as many other ones that have occurred over the years. They closed a blind eye to it because, again, Ali Bongo was a puppet of the West, especially France. France once colonized Gabon. Gabon was a colony of France. Ali Bongo was one of those puppets like the ones we've seen in Niger, as well as Burkina Faso and many of the French colony. And so they didn't condemn all the corruption that he was doing in his country for these many years, but had the audacity and have the audacity to now condemn the coup that just occurred. So that is the hypocrisy of the West, and we're going to talk about lots of those in this conversation. But also, what we've also seen since the coup took place is the same thing we've seen in Niger. The citizens of Gabon are excited and elated at this whole outcome. The soldiers are being congratulated. The citizens are rejoicing on the streets. The citizens are excited that the dynasty of the Bongo family has finally been put down. Can you imagine having one family rule a country for many years? That means if you are 49 years old or 50 years old today, the only president, and you're from Gabon, the only president that you've ever known would have been the Bongo family. But that is not just exclusively Gabon. This is something that is a problem in many countries in Africa. And so we're going to talk about that situation. Now, Ali Bongo, like as I mentioned, was a very corrupt leader. He was a person who did the dirty business of France. He, like many of the other deposed presidents in either West Africa and this time in Central Africa, have been looting their countries and really fattening the pockets of these Western countries. These Western countries put puppets like these guys in it because they want to make sure that the lifeline of Africa is sucked out of that whole continent. Now, let me tell you also the history behind this country. As a matter of fact, this is the third coup that has occurred in Gabon. Gabon is not new to coups. As a matter of fact, there was one that happened in 1964 where Leon Mba was deposed. That was a successful coup that occurred. And right after that coup happened, this is like 64, 4 years after they gained their independence. They got their independence in 1960, just along with Nigeria during that period in time. Right after that happened, France meddled with this whole thing and sent special forces. Okay, I want to talk to you guys about the meddling of France and the installation of all these puppet presidents in Africa. France sent their own special forces to attack those juntas back in the days and reinstated that president back there because he was a puppet for France, and France needed to have one of their own puppets right there ruling Gabon. And then there was another attempted coup by against this particular one that just the particular president that just got deposed in 2019, which failed. And now this successful one has just occurred. Now, the point I'm making here is that I want these coups that are happening, even while this particular one is a little different from the one that happened in Niger, but the similarities and the link between these two coups, as well as the ones that have happened over the last few years, have France written all over it, as well as Western involvement written all over this. The people of Gabon are literally, as well as people of Africa, are literally crying out and saying enough is enough with these Western puppets who have been mooching off of their countries, stealing their resources, and fattening the pockets of the West. And many of these leaders have also been successfully rich. They've been rich and wealthy. They own homes in all these foreign countries while their people are in dire straits. So I wanted to just point that hypocrisy out. So first of all, let me go right into this, because I want to show you a lot of things in this video, and I'm going to cover quite a few things that I think is important, and it's only fair that you know this. Now, even while many are saying coups are not good and coups are illegal, I've said it in my videos in the past that yes, they are illegal, but they are very, very necessary. Every country have what you call a fail-safe in the event that a dictator refuses to leave power or a president is unfit for office. And that fail-safe is, for Africa, coup. Even the West, as well as the United States, have a fail-safe that they've written into the Constitution. In the United States, there's what you call the 25th Amendment. And basically, the 25th Amendment is essentially the same thing as a coup. And it basically is, if the president of the United States, whoever that person is, becomes unfit for office, the Joint Chief, as well as the Vice President, will have to remove him or her, right? It's a mutiny. It's essentially a mutiny. It's also illegal. However, it's written into the Constitution because it's, again, one of those fail-safe situations that if you have a leader who has lost their mind, something needs to happen, and there has to be a continuation of government or the continuation of leadership. And so the 25th Amendment was put in the United States. They haven't exercised that yet. And so the way that happens is that the Joint Chief will just meet up with the Vice President and say, hey, are you ready to take on the mantle as president? Because the current president isn't fit for office. And he or she, knowing fully well the situation, will have to say yes to go along with it, or say no, I don't think so. But nonetheless, that's a conversation that's had between the vice presidents, the joint chiefs, which usually are military generals, as well as the House Speaker. And whenever that happen, they will have to depose and remove the president. Now, you have to be careful with that, because the reason why that is an illegal act is that if you fail in such things, you're not going to go back to work as it's not going to be business as usual. You're going to be arrested, right? That means the vice president and whoever else was involved will be arrested. So again, the point I'm making is that while we look at the coup in these African countries and call it illegal, unconstitutional, these things are necessary to remove anyone who has led their countries astray or become unfit for office. It is a necessary thing that is put in place that needs to be exercised if it needs to. Okay? No one likes coups. No one hopes that it gets to that point, because essentially what happens now is that you have military rule. And we all know that a military regime or military presidency is not great for any sovereign nation or democratic nation. Okay, so I wanted to point that out. Now, Ali Bongo has, while he is crying now for help, he has been someone who has truly been an embarrassment for Gabon, as well as many African leaders. This is a man who is sick. This is a man whose health has deteriorated over the last few years. Here he is on his way to France, while he's got all these people in the rain. This is exactly how he's ran his ship for years. Have all these people in the rain while he's under the umbrella. This is what you call a very embarrassing leader. And you can see him limping. And he goes to France, also limping. Look at him in this video right here with Macron, barely able to contain himself, barely able to stand, very sickly. He is 80 years old. And here's a man that was trying to run for another 7 years, another term in Gabon. But don't just look at him, right, and think that this situation with someone who is sickly and old is only exclusively for Africa. This is not just African problem. Take a look at this guy right here.
Okay.
Senator, you're up for election in 3 short years. What are your thoughts on that?
I'm sorry, I had a hard time hearing you.
That's okay. What are your thoughts on running for re-election in 2026?
What are my thoughts about what?
Running for re-election in 2026.
That's
Did you hear the question, Senator? Running for re-election in 2026?
yes.
All right, I'm sorry, you all. We're going to need a minute. Senator Benny.
That's Mitch McConnell, United States Republican Senator, who is 81 years old and also planning to run for re-election. The current president of the United States, Joe Biden, is also 80 years old. Now, so the idea of men in power who are in their 80s wanting to run for re-election is not just exclusively something you see in Africa. It is essentially everywhere in the world where powerful men don't want to relinquish power because power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So let's talk about the conversation that's being had right now. Right now, I will tell you that because of what we're seeing in Gabon and Niger and many of the African countries as it relates to coups that are going on right now, every president in Africa right now is having a conversation with their generals and with their military commanders. It's essentially a conversation where they're trying to find out if everything is good on their end, because anyone right now in Africa can get it. This is now something that is a copycat effect that is going on. So I can almost guarantee you that conversations are being had by every president who has either defrauded an election. We all know that in Africa right now, there are a series of elections going on. As a matter of fact, Zimbabwe just elected a new president who is 80 years old. And that election also was plagued with corruption. Nigeria had their own election that occurred in February that put a new president in. Ghana had one in 2020. Kenya had one last year in 2022. So there's a series of elections going on in Africa. And every country in Africa who has had any questionable election, who has had a president who has rewritten the Constitution so he can stay in power forever, is currently right now at risk of being deposed through a coup. So this conversation is something that all of them they're all worried, because at any moment they all could be waking up to a barrel of a gun pointing at them while they are asleep. At any moment they all could be just being woken up and say, hey, move here. Okay, this can happen to anybody right now, because Africa and a lot of the countries in Africa are plagued with corrupt leaders. Now, I say that I say that with prejudice, because most of those African leaders, as I mentioned in my videos in the past, are not just corrupt, but they are corrupted. Most of them are corrupted by Western influence by Western countries. I just mentioned to you how France has been involved in all the situation in its once colonized countries. Gabon, they won't let them alone. So many of these African leaders are corrupted. They're paid off, they bought, they put in compromising situations. So a lot of them have skeletons in their closet, right? Not to exempt them from any bad behavior, not to exempt them from their own corrupt practices themselves. But what I'm saying is that when you look at all these countries in Africa, there's one underlying thing that you're going to find, which is the hands of all this Western involvement in it. So this conversation is going on right now, because I can guarantee you that they're all getting calls from France, from the United States, from England, those countries who have been heavily exploiting Africa for years. And all these leaders and all these presidents are having three-way conversations between the Western countries, as well as these African countries, as well as their military industrial complex. And they want to find out, so essentially, is everything good? Are we good here, General? Is everything okay? As a matter of fact, these generals are probably being offered incentives right now. They're probably being bought out. I guarantee you that this is going on, because this is a very, very very delicate moment that we are perhaps going to see two more. And I'm going to talk about two more countries that are likely going to happen. Two countries that are likely going to have a coup before the end of the year. And so this is a very, very, very delicate, because more importantly, African citizens and African countries are tired. And they're telling the world, we're done with this. We're done with the situation. Now, here is the pickle that most of these African leaders are going to find themselves when they're having these conversations with these generals. These generals are seeing all of these things happen. And they're seeing, it's a copycat effect. They're seeing how people, citizens of these countries, are hailing the military personnel of these countries that have deposed these presidents. And so they're now within themselves looking for that same type of glory. Because if anything we know about military personnel, there's something that they like more than anything else, more than money, more than silver and gold, and that is honor. Okay, if you're in the military, when you talk about military strategy, which is why the conversations that heads of states or presidents are having with these military leaders or generals right now is very, very important, because whatever they're going to offer them, that general, or that, whether it's a 5-star general, 4-star general, 3-star general, he has to now measure that up. If that is going to outweigh what was mostly important to him, right? Because right now there's no incentive that you can offer them that's perhaps going to top the glory that they're getting, which is to be in power. Because every military person wants power. That is why they do it. Okay, the thirst for power is something that most generals thirst for. And so these heads of state or these presidents who are at the mercy of their military commanders they're in a pickle, because they what are you going to offer them? What are you going to offer your military generals that is going to outweigh the glory they're going to get from being in power, take over the country, and have all the citizens hailing them like what they're seeing right now? So that is a very, very important thing to watch out for. And I guarantee you that's the conversation that's going on right now. Okay. So let's talk about why this is yet going to create a new scramble for Africa. Let me tell you why this is bad for BRICS. So BRICS, which has 5 members. It originally had 4 original members, which is Brazil, Russia, India, and China. These were the 4 original members. And then shortly after that, they added in South Africa, hence the name BRICS. Recently just concluded their seminar that occurred, and they pulled in 6 more countries. They announced that 6 more countries are going to join them. BRICS was set up, and the whole idea of BRICS was to combat NATO and to basically knock off the West, the likes of the United States, off of their dominance and their power over the entire world. And so the whole point of BRICS is to empower countries, right? So what BRICS is essentially is where countries will no longer be trading with the US dollar, because the US dollar is a world reserve currency. And everything is bought and measured up against the US dollars, which is giving the dollar strength. So what BRICS is proposing is essentially where countries can trade with their own currency, to empower their own currency, which is a good thing. They also are proposing that they're going to have their own BRICS currency, which will also help to strengthen that organizational footprint on the world stage. Now, here's where this is bad for BRICS. While BRICS is recruiting all these countries, I guarantee that one of the key countries that BRICS would like to recruit from the African region will be countries that are part of the ECOWAS community. Those are the countries, and I'm going to tell you later on why that is not going to happen, and why this situation that we're seeing is now going to split Africa, because Africa on one hand are going to have some countries who are going to be part of BRICS. So all the countries that have had the coup, Gabon now being the recent one, as well as Niger and the other ones, are going to perhaps be recruited into BRICS, right? Now, I don't know when that's going to happen. I don't know how soon that's going to happen, but those countries are not going to go with ECOWAS, or they're not going to be part of the entire agenda, to be part of the Western agenda anymore. Okay, so that's the one thing. So those countries are likely going to join forces with the likes of China and Russia, as we've seen with Niger. These countries are excited to be part of this partnership with China and Russia. Now, here's the issue that's going to happen with ECOWAS countries, which are made of 15 members. Okay, most of which are the giants in the West African region. Most of the countries in the West African region are the lifeline of Africa. These are the countries that are really moving Africa forward. If you talk about that, you talk about Nigeria, you talk about Ghana. These countries are the ones that are mostly the lifeline of the African continent. So these countries are important for BRICS if they're going to, diversify and pull in some African countries into its organization. These countries are the ones they're looking at. Now, on the other hand, let me tell you about what NATO is doing. Because right now, the United States, if I'm the United States right now and I'm seeing all this coup occur, I tell you right now, President Biden is right now eating popcorn. He's over there eating popcorn right now, because this situation that just occurred in terms of these coups that are happening, United States, this is good for the United States. And I'm going to tell you why. It's good for the U.S., it's bad for France. Why is France? Because France is losing most of its colony. France is about to be in darkness. France, who can't survive without any African countries, right, is about to be in darkness, because this act of defiance, these coups that are occurring, have all simply been an indictment against France. They're basically a pushing out of France from their own regions. And so France is nervous right now. Macron is nervous right now, because that country cannot survive without the resources they've been stealing from these countries, which is why they've been meddling with a lot of the African countries, even after they are no longer, they were once colonized. They've been meddling with them because they need to put puppet presidents in there to keep taking their stuff. Now that these coups have occurred, they've lost ground on that. Niger just recently told France and the ambassador, you need to get out. And they gave them a couple of 24 to 40 hours to leave. France has been stubborn and defiant in Niger, saying we're not going to leave. Now, you know why they've been defiant? You know why France has been defiant? Because France has the backing of NATO. So we're going to talk about NATO for a second. They have the backing of the military might that comes with NATO, which is why they're being defiant. Now, here's where the power dynamic will need to shift for Africa, because BRIC right now has perhaps the countries that make up BRICS have the largest military force in the entire world. China alone has 2 billion people. Its military personnel alone, U.S. doesn't match it. France doesn't match it. The military personnel in China alone outmatch most of the members in NATO, and there are 31 members in NATO. Not to mention Russia being part of that. So these two already are nuclear nations. They have their own nuclear capability. which is why these countries are a problem for the United States. Now, here's where Africa will need to be smart with it. Some of the countries who have obviously conducted these coups are going to perhaps align with BRICS. So no questions there. ECOWAS countries are facing what I call a conundrum. They're facing an impossible task, and they're going to have to make a decision right here. Now, here's where I mean by where NATO is about to become strong. Because of all of these things going on, President right now is eating popcorn because he knows what is about to happen. He knows that the countries in West Africa, he knows the countries that are perhaps going to be next in lines of these coups. He knows them. His phone is buzzing right now. His phone is buzzing. And these calls that are coming in are coming from perhaps countries from ECOWAS countries. So we're talking about many of these 15 members that make up ECOWAS countries, because any one of them can get it. And what they're asking for the United States right now is help from the United States and how the U.S. can protect them. And the United States right now is going to present a new deal. And I'm going to tell you what that deal is mostly likely going to be, which is going to prevent these ECOWAS countries from ever joining BRICS. And here is the deal that is going to happen. The deal would be, if you want us to protect you, okay? If you want us to protect you, and when I mean protection, I'm talking about military personnel provided to protect these presidents who might very well be deposed by their own military very, very shortly. We don't know which one. It could happen to any country because, again, as I mentioned, any country that's ever had a contested election, that's ever had a corrupt election, that's ever had a president who has changed the constitution to rule forever, and there are many like that in Africa. All of them are at the mercy of these coups that could potentially happen. So if I'm President Biden, the conversation that's currently happening right now is that the United States, knowing fully well that this situation is also going to affect them, because U.S. also relies on Africa for a lot of the resources. However, the United States has been playing it safe and playing it smart for years. Let me tell you what I mean by that. The United States for a long time, was heavily dependent on foreign oil from a lot of these countries. They've since stopped that. They've filled up their oil reserve. Okay, not to mention that the likes of state like Texas and many other places have since discovered oil. So when it comes to oil dependency, U.S. doesn't need Africa for oil anymore. Many things, United States can cut themselves off from Africa. They can stand. They can essentially stand. It'll hurt, but not as much. The one thing that will possibly hurt would be chips. Right now, there's a huge shortage of chips. So the U.S. currently gets a lot of the chips, the ones that help to build some of the computers, as well as the apps, as well as the drones that the U.S. now has been heavily involved in, and their space exploration. These things require chips. They've been getting quite a few of those from Africa, Nigeria, Congo, many of the Western countries. Now, that is the part that's probably going to hurt them a little bit, but they can do without if it came to it. If it came to it where there's a war that breaks out in that West African region, the U.S. will be fine. Guess who is not going to be fine? France. France isn't going to. So right now, what Macron is doing, along with all these other West African leaders, is calling on the United States. I guarantee this is what's going on, and cashing in the IOU from 1778. Okay, now what happened in 1778? In 1778, France came in to help the United States during their Revolutionary War. When the war first broke out in 1775, it was a full-blown war from 1776 all the way through. France stepped in 1778. I guarantee you that is something that France knows that they will need to cash. They will need to cash in at some point. I have no doubt that Macron is now calling on Biden to cash in that favor to help with stabilizing their relationship with Africa during this whole coup situation. I guarantee you they cash in. Not to mention, the recent assistance that France offered to the United States when it helped its and rescued a lot of its soldiers in Tonga in 2017, when there was a botched operations during which 4 U.S. Green Berets died during that situation in Tonga, a village in Niger. France came in and rescued the trapped military soldiers in Tonga and rescued them out of that. That is something they're going to cash in. Now, what are they asking for? They're asking for the help of the United States, who can afford to see a war break out if it goes that way, and they can weather the consequences that could come as a result of maybe a cutoff temporarily from any resources in Africa. France can't afford that because they're going to be certainly in darkness, and they can't afford that. So here's the conversation that's going on right now. There's a new deal that I think is going to be signed. And here's what, if I'm President Biden right now, here's what Biden is probably telling a lot of the ECOWAS communities and a lot of the ECOWAS countries who could likely very well face a coup at any moment in now, is I can offer you military protection and military support. And when I mean military support, we're not talking about any branch of the United States Army or United States military, because that would be unconstitutional, first of all. Okay? Not to mention it goes against the Geneva Convention. So no country, no sovereign country can send any of his forces to go fight for another country against another country. That's against the Geneva Convention. Okay? Not to mention the U.S. Congress is not going to sign off for that. They're not going to sign off to allow United States military branch of military go fight in a war for someone else. It's not going to happen, right? No country is going to do it. But what they do as a loophole is send mercenaries. That's usually who they send whenever they do that, because you can't send a branch of military, because that's obviously against, as I mentioned, the Geneva Convention. Not to mention you could be tried for war crimes by doing that. So the way they do this is to send mercenaries, which is why the Wagner group from Russia was sent. These are mercenaries. These are ex-military commandos who were once part of a special force, and they're no longer. They're private contractors. Those they can certainly send. Can send those private contractors who work and do private work for the likes of the National Rifle Association, the NRA here in the United States, or gun manufacturers. These are people that are paid mercenaries, right? Again, I'm just giving you my analysis right here, okay? But if I'm in the United States and I want to capitalize on what's going on in West African countries to my advantage by offering protection to a lot of these West African countries who are not coming to me, who have to come to me for help, because what they're going to come is like, hey, we need help. Because once you have your generals ambush you, right, your life is at stake. So you're going to need a place to go run for asylum if that happened, or you're going to need someone to come rescue you. That is the type of protection that the U.S. is likely going to offer. So the U.S. is probably having this conversation right now. We love this country. Hey, this is probably happening to you, because guess what? A lot of you countries have fallen into that same category that your people are going to may come after you. We can offer you this protection. In exchange to this, in exchange for our protection, you cannot sign with BRICS. You cannot join BRICS. Do you understand that? Because what U.S. is going to probably do, the United States is to cut the legs of BRICS and prevent BRICS from expanding much further than it is right now. So I can guarantee, if I'm the United States, here's what's at play, is I'll offer you protection against the possibility of these things happening in your country. So if it does happen, we can offer you military protection who can potentially push these things out and reinstate you back into your position. In exchange for this, you can't join BRICS. That's why I say this is bad for BRICS. Now, what are the likelihood of these countries in West African, these members of ECOWAS? What do you think the likelihood of them accepting that deal would be? You ask yourself, what do you think the likelihood of this? Now, here is the condition of the deal. Also, in my opinion, is that here's what I think will happen. If they go against this, okay, if you don't, or if you break this agreement, what we're going to do is we're going to oust every one of you and release all your secrets, which many of them have secrets, of course, because they are all bought by the West. Okay, see, the West, they've been playing chess. This is chess, not checkers. They've been playing chess the entire time while these African head of states have been sleeping and fall asleep. So if I'm the United States, I'm offering, this is what they're probably offering. You can't join, and if you go against this, right, we're going to release all your dirty findings, every one of the things that we have on every one of you, to your people, and leave you to the mercy of your people. Do you understand that? And now, if you're president of this country, what do you think is going to happen? You're going to take the deal. You're going to say, sure, whatever. You're going to take the deal because you are like, this is what I mean. That's why I said this is a conundrum. You are in a tight pickle because there's nothing you can do at this point, and you need protection. Now, the only way for this not to play out the way I've described it to you all would be for African leaders to do the one thing that we've never known our African leaders to do. The only way for this not to play out exactly, because that scenario I just painted for you is the same old situation that we've seen for Africa. So that's going to split Africa. You're going to have one part of Africa and some countries join or not join because they can't join NATO, because NATO is for white people. You know, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, that's a European thing. So you can't join NATO. And now the New Deal is going to prevent you from joining BRICS. And so now these countries are going to basically be in limbo without any military protection to fight for them in case there's an invasion against the countries. These countries will not have the backing of a military might like Russia or China protecting them because they're not part of BRICS. So essentially, this is a bad situation for any one of these countries that take this deal. You get the point. Now, the only thing that will make this not happen, that African leaders will need to do, not to have the scenario that I've just painted out, will be for African leaders to do the one thing that we know we've never known them to do, which would be to be selfless. To be selfless and think about their own country before themselves. To say no to this deal. That would be the only way out for these African leaders. Because if I were these African leaders, if I were any of these countries right now, knowing fully well that I don't have a strong military body in my country, knowing fully well I don't have a strong military force to protect my country in the event of war, and the arrogance like you have with the likes of France, who tells Niger, we're not going to leave because they know they have NATO to back them up. African countries don't have any of these. If I were these African countries, I would join BRICS. Because with BRICS, you have that backing. It's essentially let me give you the analogy real quickly. I'll use the analogy like the prison situation, like if you went to prison. Now, if you went to prison and you are the weakling, the weak person in prison, you don't know how to fight. You just got arrested, you put in the state penitentiary or federal prison with known criminals and real hard criminals, but you can't fight. Now, but you have money, and what you want to do is buy yourself protection. That's essentially what you want to do. So you want to have your friends, outside put money in your commissary account, where they can put money in there because you want to buy yourself protection. Because you have all these groups in prison who are going to kill you because you are just a lone ranger in prison. So you need to buy yourself protection. And so you buy yourself protection from being killed or from being molested or being attacked in prison. Now, while you're doing that, if you were smart, you also want to make sure that you begin to build yourself up. So maybe go to the gym population, start pushing weights while you're getting this, protection you bought yourself, because that's temporarily, right? That protection is temporal. The guys that you're buying protection that are protecting you, at one point they're going to turn against you because you're the weak person, right? You're the weak guy. At some point your money is going to run out, and they're going to turn against you. So you want to buff up. You want to go to the gym pop. You want to buff up. You want to do some push up, so that way you can stand on your own. In the event they turn against you, now you protect yourself. That's essentially the analogy that I'm giving you, which I think African countries need to do. They need to buy protection by joining BRIC so they can have a military position against the likes of the West in the event that things go wrong. That would be the smart play here. That would be the smart play. However, it will come at a cost. And the cost will be because the US and the Western countries who have dirt on these African leaders are going to release to the public all the dirt that we all don't know about, but we know somehow are in there. They're going to release these dirt out in the media and leave these African countries to the judgment of their own people. And it's not going to be good. This is not going to be good when we find out what our leaders signed us all for. And that is something that I can guarantee you most African leaders who have been stealing our resources and giving it to the West for years don't want leaked out to the public. That's why they're not going to take the deal. Now, if you are a citizen of any of these countries, you ought to be worried, because it's essentially going to be the same old, and the deterioration of your countries, right? As I mentioned, the only one way out will be for them not to take it. But that will come at a cost, which will be at a cost to their lives, the lives of their family, their families, their wife, their children. Because once this gets out, the consequences could be just dire. And that's something that they can't. Not to mention they're not going to have an asylum, refuge anywhere outside of shores of Africa for them to go hide. Not to mention that. So it's a dire cost. Now, the other way out of this will be for them to say no, not accept the deal that the West is offering, knowing fully well that there's a consequence coming. If I were them, I would just resign my position. That could very well be another solution. I would just say, hey, I want to resign my position as the president of whatever country that is, because that could very well just weather that. In the event that these things get leaked out, we may see it as, okay, they've resigned, they've gone already, who cares? That could very well be one way. Or it could very well be like, no, I don't accept it, and they'll still get the backlash. Either way, it's a conundrum. And that is what I think is a hard road ahead, because what we're seeing as a result of these coups are going to keep happening. Because Africa is speaking, and Africa is saying enough is enough, and Africa is crying out for her freedom finally. And there's a new political alliance that is being formed. And so countries in West Africa who are going to align with BRICS are going to align with BRICS, and countries in West Africa who cannot align with BRICS as a result of this new deal that could possibly be happening right now between those countries as well as the West might prevent them from happening. So we're going to see a split in Africa, and that is going to be a tough road ahead. So anyway, let me know what your thoughts are. Let me know if you agree with my analysis, if you see what I've just painted out for you. Because I will tell you, from my vantage point looking at this, it's a tough road ahead for Africa. And Africa is going to need all our prayers. Because even while we have these coups that have occurred, coups are not good. The military regime is just a setback for all African countries that currently have this military personnel right now ruling those countries. That's a setback. Africa needs all our prayers. And it'll be all our responsibilities to stand in the gap for Africa, to pray for her and support our brothers and sisters who are in oppression, and pray that God liberates us finally. Thank you all for watching. Please like the video, share the content, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you all next time.
Ser det som ett allt är det jag vill wava. De här yardis, de vill ju bara dra ner oss. Men du är fett och vanlig.